Hey guys, it's Cans, and today I'm drawing a slimy snail in oil pastels. I got today's video idea from my own experiences because I looked after a couple of random garden snails, and one day I was just deciding to make some art and I thought a snail might work, and then I looked at the stuff that I had on my shelf and I thought, well, okay, I haven't used oil pastels in forever and I had a set, so I just got them out and I thought, well, it works because snails are kind of slimy and so are oil pastels. This art is also kind of semi-personal in the sense of around the time that I drew this, I had just lost one of my snails, which was really sad for me and it broke my heart much more than I thought it would. His name was Harry, and we buried his shell in the rose bush outside. And within 2 days, I realized that him and our other snail had a couple of dozen babies, so that was great. So Harry lives on, which is fabulous, and I feel like this is a really nice memorial piece for my little snail. So I didn't really know what to expect when I went in with this. Obviously, I've used oil pastels before. I think a lot of people do, especially when you're younger. But I thought, these things are quite creamy, oily, I suppose. So I just spent a lot of time looking at my existing snail, Gary, and looking at kind of undertones that he has. So he was kind of blue, but also kind of brown, but mostly kind of this grey colour. And I was like, okay, let's just see what happens. So I put down some fine, gentle layers of dark blue and some yellow ochre. And I went over that entirely in grey, and I really enjoyed how it blended out really smoothly, but also the colours were able to show through still. So I layered those three main colours over and over and over again to get the body of the snail looking somewhat how I wanted it to. It was definitely an experience, and I realised just how heavy-handed I can be in my art. So I might need to invest in some more pastels if I'm going to do this again. I've recently been taking a lot of inspiration from my own pets or creatures or rescues. I have 3 cats and 2 rescued frogs, and now I think I have 6 remaining of the snails, and then a chameleon. And so I do a lot of what I want to call semi-rescue work, and I've just been really enjoying watching nature come to life in front of my eyes. So the snails were particularly interesting because they're so pretty while also being technically very dull. So you'll see I put a lot of colours and I try to have a lot of fun with this drawing, even though technically snails are very boring coloured kind of creatures, especially garden snails, the kind that I have. But this was really fun for me, and I was having just a very reminiscent time of maybe being, young or nursery school or something like that, and just playing with crayons and making a bit of a mess. But it was also just really fun, and I was really loving the way that these were blending. It was just great. And here you can see me taking a white pastel now and going back over and trying to lighten up certain areas or create a bit of a slimy kind of look. I don't know if I really got that down, but I think the white did change definitely how this snail looked, and I think that it did bring a bit more life to the picture. So here you can see up close, it's very messy on the edges. I don't think that a person can always get a very smooth edge with oil pastels, but you can see just how nicely they blended together. Now for the shell, I really wanted to contrast the blue that was in the actual snail body. So I went in with yellows and oranges first and foremost to just establish that. By the end of the shell, you don't really see much of the yellows or oranges left over, but I think that just by making sure that they were in there in the first place, I hope it kind of comes through that I was playing with contrasting colours. A couple of years ago, actually, I painted a pottery snail that was quite big and lived in our garden for many, many years, and his body was, I want to say, duck egg blue, and his shell was bright orange, and we named him Walter, and he was a really, really, really nice garden ornament. Unfortunately, middle of last year-ish, we accidentally cracked him, and there wasn't really any way that we could save him from that. So this is also a memorial piece to Walter. I suppose that makes this a very dark video. But yeah, I've really didn't ever really have an interest in snails. I always thought they were kind of gross, especially as a kid. I just did not interact with bugs and slugs and all that kind of nonsense. But when I rescued Harry and Gary from a friend's house where they kept getting stepped on and all sorts of nonsense, I was really interested by just how quickly I fell in love with them. They're very strange animals, but they're very easy to look after, and they're just fun to watch, I suppose. They're kind of like fish in that they're slow and mesmerizing, and that was really, really fun for me. So I kind of just experimented and went past my own horizons on this one and just learned, okay, cool, it's a bug, but it's great, My mother almost levitated because obviously they're kind of a pest in the gardens, but I told her, hey, they're not getting kept in the gardens, so there's no real issue here. What you'll see me doing for this shell is just basically layering all of these really warm tones. So like I say, the yellow and the orange. I've also brought in the yellow ochre, this kind of fleshy pink, and then a reddish brown, and then a really deep brown. The reason being because snails from a distance, their shells kind of look like one color, but when you look up, they've got a million different colors in them, and they're quite stripy and textured and all sorts. So I really just wanted to play with that, and it's obviously not a perfect replica of my actual snail's shell. I never intended that in the first place, but just to try and create that, if you've seen a snail shell, you know what I'm talking about, that kind of liney, multiple colors. It was interesting, and it was fun, especially to do in this medium, because these things blended really, really, really well. And then just for that more illustrative, cartoony purposes, I put in this solid swirl of lighter color going all the way through, and I think that also just helped break up the shapes of the shell, because otherwise it would have been quite difficult to read. So here I'm going in with my darkest brown and just literally sketching in that liney texture that I say that the shells have. And when I started doing this, I really felt like I was starting to get somewhere with this picture, because it was getting really messy, and oil pastels are not easy to use. They're very creamy, and that's great and quite colorful, but they smudge and get muddy really easily. And I thought that wasn't necessarily the worst thing, considering this is already a brown object, but I didn't want to lose all the work that I'd already been trying to put in. So going back in and drawing in these lines and using the different colors to create that multicolored, multi-tone texture, I think really helped. You'll also notice that when I'm trying to blend two or more colors together, I kind of go back to a colored pencil technique, which is called burnishing, where you take the lightest color and you use it to blend and smudge all of the colors underneath it together. And it worked, but I think with oil pastels, they're much more opaque and they sit on top of each other more than they mix together, or at least the ones that I have. So the burnishing didn't necessarily work very well. So I have learned since that you can just, and it seems so simple now, you can just blend them outright together without having to use any extra pastel, or you could use a paper blender, a paper stump, and you can blend with that as well. So I think if I'm going to do some more oil pastel stuff, I'm 100% going to use those techniques instead, because I feel like going over with a colored pastel really lost those details, and you'll see here I have to put them in all over again. So now I've colored in that central swirl to help break up the shape of the shell, and I'm just going back in now to put more yellow ochre back into the actual slug. And I feel like this was a happy ending for me in terms of the actual colors. I was okay with that. And then I got my new X-Acto knife and I started scratching out some of the details that I was missing in the shell that I really, really wanted to be noticeable. So using this little X-Acto knife and pressing exceptionally lightly, because this thing was sharp, I was able to scratch through that texture that I really enjoyed. And I think that this was also another turning point of the piece for me. I was so much happier when these details started to come through properly. As I say, this X-Acto knife was really, really sharp, and more than once did I accidentally slice through the paper. And that could be mostly avoided just by me learning how to hold the pen properly, but I also found that because the sketchbook that I'm using has a very textured surface on its paper, I started digging up pieces of the paper as well. I also went ahead and used this knife to kind of scratch out some of the details of the actual slug body. So just because I felt like the more that I scratched away, the lighter it was, so I was able to put in those little highlights, and I think that also gave a bit more of a slimy, damp look to the snail. I've definitely never tried to draw a realistic snail before, and this was 100% such a learning curve for me. So for the leaf, I chose a very, very simple and basic color palette of just the dark green I had, the light green I had, the same yellow ochre to just kind of tie that into all the elements of the drawing. And I think I also use a bit of that reddish brown just to give it more of a natural tone because, you know, leaves aren't necessarily this green in real life. I took the inspiration of this leaf from my basil plant, which might seem silly, but actually the basil plant I grow specifically as nourishment for my snails. So they obviously get a lot of different vegetables and stuff like that, but for the most part they're really into basil, and it grows really prolifically on my plant, so I use basil mostly to just give them that substance. I was weirdly having a struggle trying to get this leaf to look right. I've drawn many leaves, but for whatever reason, just because it was an oil pastel and it was just a different texture completely to what I was used to, and these colors were much brighter than I thought they were going to be, I was having a hard time making it look how I wanted. But I definitely think by the end of it, it did turn out okay, so I was okay with that. And I would like to affectionately name the snail Basil, just in honor of the leaf that he is sitting on. And then I also went through with that knife again, and I did try to scratch some details into the leaf, but I didn't find it needed as much because the leaves of a basil plant are usually quite smooth. So I did that, but not too much. And here you'll see me putting the last little detail-y bits on the actual snail, because once that I had the leaf done, I realized I just wanted a lot more white in the snail to give it a lot more of that three-dimensionality. I don't know how well it worked, but the white did look much better in my opinion. So I'm just finishing up with the details, putting some more blue on the stalks of the eyes to create some darkness up in that corner, because I was having a hard time with the actual composition of this drawing. I felt like it wasn't as balanced as I wanted it to be, so you'll see I put in a big pink I put in big pink blobs as circles of oil pastel in the background, and I'm not sure how much I like that decision, but it did fill up the space that I was not happy with, and the circles did bring together the shape of the shell, so I suppose it worked, and you live and you learn. I think next time around I'd probably spend a bit more time in my sketching phase just to make sure that I've made the construction of the picture a lot more appealing to myself. But I think this turned out really decently, and I really enjoyed using oil pastels for the first time in a long time. I have ordered a new set, a bigger set, and I will be trying to do portraits because I've done a lot more research since this drawing. So that's today's drawing. Thank you for sitting with me, and I hope that you enjoyed what I had to offer, and have a lovely day.